Welcome back to the 27th. This is a setup analysis for the Chevrolet Corvette C3-R spec, one of two C3s introduced this past week by Team Ryza. We'll be taking a look at the R spec, comparing the default setup to one that I created to see if there's anything we can learn about this car setup-wise that you can take on track to glory and victory. The Corvette C3, also known as the Stingray, is world-renowned. You know this. It's an icon of American muscle and coveted by car collectors to this day. It was produced from 1968 to 1982. It's really hard to keep track of the number and variety of C3s, as there were so many. You could have the exact same car produced in 2 different years with 2 different engines, only minor differences otherwise. The R-Spec version you see here is one of them. As you know, many racing outfits are privateers, not officially affiliated with Chevrolet. Modifications were common. This gave the teams great leeway in what they wanted to do with their racing C3s. One famous outfit was headed by legendary Corvette racer John Greenwood, otherwise known as the Rocket Man. His team was involved in endurance racing, and for all intents and purposes, the R-Spec we see here may be modeled after one of his cars. The R-Spec features a modified version of the famous Chevy 427 Big Block. Called the L88, a V8 with enormous horsepower, so much that Chevy actually discouraged its sale to regular consumers, but it benefited race teams just fine. If you're curious why American muscle cars are known for big-time horsepower but lacking in cornering speed, this is where it all started. The C3 is a front-ended monster. Chevrolet actually considered a mid-engine design, but opted against it due to production efficiency and budgetary constraints. So they just ramped up the horsepower instead. Welcome to America. In AMS2, I haven't driven anything like it so far, not to this degree at least. It has a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personality, one half steady, deliberate, wanting to go straight, easy to overdrive. The other half, seat of the pants, wanting to end you at any moment. In other words, it has the pucker factor. As far as the setup is concerned, putting one together was more about feel than telemetry. Obviously, the Vette was made prior to any of this stuff, and how do I say this? It sort of scoffs at it, like it was saying, oh, you use telemetry, oh, that's cute. So this build isn't about fixing anything per se. Instead, it sort of manages the car to a particular preference, so I'll talk about what my concerns and goals were. Starting with corner entry, trail braking is limited. The weight of the car over the front kind of overpowers the front tires in a way, and the differential doesn't help. There was no spring or damper magic that I could use to give it any more turn-in. You just have to be deliberate and precise on braking and your entry speed on point. Too late and you overcook the corner, too early and you're slow. Complicating this is the front brakes. Upon release of the car, at least, they are perpetually overheated, and so your braking marks will change based on the temperatures of your brakes. You frankly have to watch your brake temps to guide your braking points for most corners as the race progresses. Mid-corner is dominated by the differential, and finding the perfect moment to turn understeer into oversteer with the throttle. You can easily drift this car, and it's fun and somewhat controllable, but going straight is best. So initially I tried to set the car up for rotation, stiffening the rear, keeping the front relatively soft. I tried using the dampers to add more transition control, more or less bite here and there. I soon realized I was trying to turn the car into something it was not, and the car did not respond. So I flipped the script, and you guessed it, I added more understeer to it. At this point you may be saying, huh? Well, hear me out. The speed of the car comes from the rears, keeping them planted and locked, and the car comes alive. Too much rotation mid-corner can aggravate the tendency to power oversteer and start the car into drifting when you hit the throttle. But adding front ARB stiffness calms this tendency to oversteer too much mid-corner and beyond. So what do we do for rotation then? Well, we manufacture it with deliberate braking, deliberate corner entry speed, some biased bump and rebound settings, and a touch of situational brake bias on locking and rake. Think rotate and sit. So let's take a look at the telemetry. Alright, here we are with RST, and as usual I register a 3-lap hot lap session with the defaults and one with the custom package. And taking a look at the best lap times, I was over half a second faster with the custom package, which is always good to see. My work is being rewarded. But the first interesting thing I wanted to point out when looking at this is the brake temperatures for the Corvette. Now, this is something I mentioned before. The brake temperatures are a thing with this car, and so we're looking at the brake temperatures graphs. And the first two are the front brake temps and the rear brake temps. The third graph, however, is the one of importance, and that is brake balance. Now we have the brake bias option in the setup screen where we can alter how much brake pressure is comparatively put on the fronts versus the rears. But brake temperature impacts how much bias on an active level. So when you're hitting the brakes and the temperatures of the brakes are changing, their efficiency and effectiveness change as well. This brake balance takes that into account. So if you see here, we're looking at the first lap with the default package, and when you start the session, the brakes temperatures are optimized, and you can see that the brake balance is roughly around 57%. Okay, but at the end of the lap at Imola, we're peaking at over 550 degrees on the front tires, which means they're losing effectiveness. They're probably, the effective range is probably below 500, probably around 450 actually. And take a look at our brake balance. We're well over 60% to the front, into the 62% range. Now let's look at the last lap. And wowzers, the brake temperatures are peaking consistently above 600 degrees, which is red, and again 60% brake balance across the board. So no matter what your bias is, the brake balance is going to be reflected in that. So let's take a look at the custom. Let's compare the first lap again. I think that'd be interesting. You can see that the custom, and I think in the settings for default it was 66% bias to the front. In the custom, I did 60% bias, and you can see they start off similarly, but there's a deviation in brake balance. Whereas my custom build is around 58%. The default is peaking at 62%. Let's look at the last lap as a comparison, and you can see the temps for the custom build are below that of the default package. But the brake balance is about 4% rearward compared to the defaults. Now, the brake balance is what we're using to create that brake bias rotation on corner entry. So this was an important fix. Next, we're going to go into the dampers. Let's take a look at those dampers. Okay, so traditionally, if you've seen any of these segments before, AMS2 likes to put in a rebound bias on all of the dampers, and these are the four dampers representing the four corners of the tires. Rebound bias is obviously this bar right here into the left hand side. The higher these bars are, the stiffer the rebound. If the bump was favored, the bump side on the right would be higher and the rebound would be lower. But you can see it's pretty much rebound biased on all tires. Take a look at the custom package. Very similar and still rebound biased, and you probably are shocked. Well, the reason why I wanted to include rebound bias, especially in the rears, is because that also helps with corner entry rotation, believe it or not. And a little bit of rebound bias on the fronts does actually indeed induce some oversteer tendencies on cornering. So when you're entering the cornering, it'll have a little bit more bite. You don't want to go too much, but just enough. But on the rears, I want to mention one more thing before we move on. Having rebound bias also means that the bump side of the things, side of the dampers, are softer, and softer bump dampers kind of calms down when you apply the throttle. So instead of being like a shock to the rear tires where it would cause them to kind of lose grip and hence power oversteer, having a softer bump setting on the rears is actually preferable as well. So let's go into tire wear, and we're going to look at the last lap, actually the full run, and you're going to see here something pretty interesting. The default package has almost twice the amount of wear as the custom package. almost twice. So that's informative. These tires are pretty robust, 3 laps, 2%. It's not a big deal. I just thought that was interesting. Let's move on to the differential. Always got to look at the differential, right? Well, the thing that we can observe from the differential here is, one, it's a fixed LSD. There's nothing we can do differential setting wise, and it appears that the car is unlocking and locking in all the right places. So that's a good thing. As far as power oversteer is concerned, it looks to me that when you're throttling, the peak wheel slip that you'll be seeking is about 10%, which is actually quite on point. So that's my take on the Chevrolet Corvette C3-R spec in the GT Classic category. I do want to take a moment at this point and point something out. This channel is obviously AMS2 focused, and I realize that there are many AMS2 skeptics out there with solidified opinions. Up to this point, I've been driving this car exclusively for over a week, including beta, and I am still learning. No 2 laps are the same. It is as visceral, raw, and alive as I could have possibly imagined a sim car to be. Mashing pedals is not an option here. It is a monster of a car, and you are barely in control. Add to the fact that AMS2's live track system is clearly demonstrated in the Vette, rewarding racing line driving and making offline driving particularly intense. If you're not sweating in the sim you prefer, there are other options. As sim racers, we can quibble about this or that, physics or realism wise. This car says you want physics, then it punches you in the mouth. It's physics overload. I'm not paid to say this, it's a fact. Coming up, more builds, more news, more podcasts. In the meantime, thanks for watching and take care.